Welcome back to Stone Age Videos. In this episode of those 3 Eclipse BCSs that we cleaned up, we're going to put one of them back together and give you a tour of an Eclipse and explain a little bit how a double action internal mix bottle feed airbrush works. So let's get started. Kind of got all the parts laid out and pretty much the configurations that they have when they're inside the assembled airbrush. So let's start off with looking at the tools I'm going to need to put this back together. I've got my 1.4 millimeter Iwata needle packing screwdriver. I'll put the needle packing back in. I've got my air valve wrench. This is also out of the Pro Maintenance Toolkit. I got my little tube of new Super Lube Iwata lube. The clear stuff, not the blue. This is much better. And a pipe cleaner for putting our valve piston O-ring back into place inside the body of the airbrush. But let's jump in. First thing we're going to do is put that needle packing back in place. And so I'll take the needle packing. There's the Teflon O-ring inside. Oops, PTFE O-ring. Then we will line that up. And here's the first thing I want to show you. When this is all tightened down, the screwdriver is about right here, which means that needle packing inside the body of the airbrush is kind of sitting where the ATA in Iwata is. So that's where that is. That's that long column, that long channel in the back there. So alright, let's put that in place. And the screwdriver does a great job. That pin finds the hole, that channel that leads up to the chamber here where the paint goes into the airbrush, and we're just going to start tightening it up. Hit it on the first try. You can see it's getting shorter. We want this snug, not tight. So a little further forward than I thought. So the nice thing about this is I can check the tension while I'm working, and we can get it a tiny bit tighter. And yeah, with a regular screwdriver without the pin, it's possible to get that needle packing too tight in there, so tight you can't get your needle in. So we want to avoid that. Alright, needle packing's in place. Let's do the air valve next. Let me show you a few things about that. Here's the main lever. That's the valve piston, and it pivots back and forth. We'll talk about why that is when we put the action back in. But this goes down into an opening down inside the body. There it is. And sitting below that opening is this valve piston O-ring. Here is the valve body. Here's the air valve itself. There's the valve spring. And there's the air valve guide that screws into the bottom and holds everything together. So before we put it in, let's get a good feel of how things get aligned. So this valve piston passes through the body of the airbrush into this valve piston O-ring, which is neoprene and not solvent proof. So there we go, and then that sits on top of the valve body, and so the whole thing slips up and down. And most of the time when your trigger gets sticky, it's because you let liquid get back in here, and it doesn't take much to get things all sticky in the connection between the valve piston O-ring and the valve piston itself. So yeah, and then the air valve itself, we're going to put the O-ring side up, and that rests against the little, you can see where the tube tapers down to the channel that the top of the air valve goes into. So that goes in first. And then the valve spring is going to go in. So that sits inside the body of the airbrush like so. And this operates up and down. There we go. Let's see if I can show you that. Yeah. Whoops. Well, that didn't work too well, but let's keep going. So this sits way up in here, and that sits on top of it. So we're going to put in the valve piston O-ring first. Slip this pipe cleaner down. That's from the Iwata cleaning kit. non-shredding cotton. Only need to put a little bit on. We're going to pull this back through, and it's seated. So we can see, well, you can kind of see that's down in there, and the opening's wide. So now we're going to put the valve body back in. And to get that to go in smoothly, and maybe help with the air seal a little, I'll put a tiny bit of Iwata lube on the O-ring on the valve body. This is also not solvent proof. More good reason not to soak your air valve. And we'll turn that a little bit, get that distributed, and then I'll take the butt of the needle and push that down in, and there it's seated. You can see all the threads exposed, and that goes all the way down. So we just caught that valve piston O-ring between the top of the valve body and the body of the airbrush. Okay, air valve goes in with the O-ring up, and we'll slip on the valve spring. And now we're going to make use of the valve wrench, air valve wrench. It's got two different sizes on it that fit both sizes of air valves found on Iwata airbrushes. So that goes in there like so, and we get the threads lined up, and this we're going to tighten all the way down. That's it. Okie dokie. Now we're going to put the action back in. Well, we'll put the main lever back in, but let's talk about how it interacts with the needle chucking guide here. And when you put your main lever back in, you see this cutout? Yeah, make sure that's pointed towards the back. That's so you can full throttle the airbrush and not bang up the body. And also that makes sure that the slot the needle passes through is running front to back. Because if you put it in sideways, try and push the needle in, yeah, that's not going to work well at all. So before we slip this in, I want to make sure that air valve's running real smoothly. So I'll take a tiny bit of Iwata lube, put it on the butt of the needle here. That's more than enough. I'm going to go down into that opening there and just rub that lube all around on that valve piston O-ring. Okay, cut out towards the back and see if we can get that valve piston to go into the hole in the body. This can be tricky, but with a little practice and looking down in there, you can get it the first try, and that's nice and springy. Okie dokie, let's put the action back in. We have our auxiliary lever. Whoops, didn't show you how this works. Well, let's pop that back out. It's easy enough to put back in. When this is butted up against the main lever, the shaft on the main lever, you can see that auxiliary lever pivots so that you have good contact against the body of the needle chucking guide. And that's the same reason that the valve piston pivots, so that you have good pressure on the air valve as you're working the trigger back and forth. That's the double action part. Cut out towards the back, aim for that little opening, and get it. Come on. There we go. I've got our air valve back together. So we're going to put in the needle checking guide like so. Put the valve spring on. And then this is called the spring guide. You can use this as an adjustment of the tension on the air valve, but I'd like it all screwed all the way down. So if I loosened this, I'd have a little less tension on that valve when I pull the trigger back to get more pain out of it. And don't forget the needle chucking nut. Yeah, if you put everything back together and forget to tighten this, your needle's not going to move and you think you broke your airbrush, but we'll come back to that. Alright, let's go after the front end. Let me show you a little bit about the front end. We have the needle cap, the nozzle cap, the head cap, and the nozzle. So that nozzle rests inside this great big cavity here, and you see we got two holes at the front of the airbrush. That's where the air comes out from the air valve. When you push the trigger down, it goes up and fills the space. That big hole is sealed up by the nozzle, and if you notice, there's these three little holes on the perimeter that directs the air up into what's about to become yet another chamber. Up front here, there's the opening of 3 little holes, and that's where the nozzle cap comes in. And when this gets screwed on, we have a chamber inside there, so the air mixes up all smoothly, and it's going to come out of that ring around the nozzle. You can kind of see the tip of the nozzle there with this ring around it, and that's what makes this an internal mix airbrush. So yeah, the paint goes into the airstream from inside the airstream. So let's put the nozzle in place. It's self-centering. And we'll screw the head cap back on with the needle cap already on there. Try it again. Usually I'm right on top of the mat so parts don't go bouncing all over the place. Okay. Got it this time. So we tighten that down. We're good to go. Now we put the needle cap on to protect that needle and nozzle when I drop it, if I drop it. Alright, everything's good. Let's put the needle in. Being careful not to bend it on the way in. Hit a little resistance when I hit that O-ring. And we're just going to gently push past this. You should see the tip of the needle sticking out of the nozzle there. Can you see that? Not too good on the video. And it's a good idea to pay attention to how far that sticks out, so you know not to push any further, because you can flare that nozzle out and the airbrush won't spray right, and if it's flared out enough it'll plug up that ring around the nozzle and you won't get any airflow. So tighten the needle chucking nut. If you don't, see, that needle doesn't move at all. That needle doesn't move at all. Oh, this must be a little tight in here. So if we tighten the needle chucking nut, yeah, everything moves like it's supposed to. Screw the handle on, and this one is ready to send over to test drive it and make sure everything's running smoothly. So I send my customer back an airbrush that sprays and looks like new. Thanks for tuning in to Tag Team videos, or Tag Team Stone Age videos. And Iwata Tag Team, these are the airbrushes you're looking for.